Chapter 273. My Late Senior 1. The emperor remained hidden deep within the palace, out of sight even when a civil servant in the empire spread poison in high society or a wave of purges swept through foreign lands. If any other monarch had shown signs of abdication, the country would have been in turmoil. But honestly, in the case of this emperor, most people would have gladly told him to take a break. It was almost a relief. The current emperor had been a workaholic from the beginning of his reign until just a few years ago, and more than a few noble families had been crushed under his hand. Maybe having him live like a hermit would actually be better for the mental health of both the nobles and the civil servants. Besides, the emperor needed to step back so the crown prince could step up. Your Majesty, please follow in the footsteps of the Wanli Emperor. It's been nearly 300 years since His Majesty received the mandate of heaven. In the endless history of the empire, those 300 years will merely be a small part, and even this moment is just a stepping stone towards the future. Of course, it was an empty wish. No matter how much the emperor gradually handed things over to the crown prince, he always personally delivered the closing speech. We are the bridge between the legacies of the past and the future generations. Do not forget this, and work in unity towards progress. This speech was routine. The emperor simply repeated his yearly themes of unity and progress. The nobles, who had heard this speech countless times, listened without much thought. Be united in loyalty to the emperor and advance for the good of the nation. It was hardly a difficult command. Unless one was outright planning treason, it was as simple as saying, "Happy New Year." Crown Prince, why don't you say a few words as well? Things took an unexpected turn just when the ceremony seemed like it was going to wrap up smoothly. The emperor handed the closing remarks over to the crown prince at the very end of the New Year's speech. A ripple ran through the ranks of the kneeling nobles as they witnessed the old son fully passing the torch to the new one. Damn it, I was caught in that same ripple, too. This was unsettling. Was this really going to be the year of abdication like the ministers had been speculating? If things go south, I might have to leave the academy and go groveling for mercy. Unlike the uneasy nobles, the crown prince seemed prepared. After bowing to the emperor, he stepped forward. As His Majesty said, we are the bridge connecting the past and the future. We must not take the legacy we've received for granted, nor should we focus only on the present, we must look toward the future. It wasn't much different from the emperor's own speech. Of course, the crown prince couldn't contradict the emperor at a time like this. That would have been strange. In any case, the emperor likely told him to speak just to give him some presents, not because he wanted him to say anything revolutionary. However, there's no need to rush. A bridge built hastily will collapse, but the one we seek to build is meant to last for a millennia. Was it just me, or did that sound like, I'm going to make you work forever? And so, I will wait. I will wait for those who will serve alongside the imperial family now, and for the treasures who will serve after them in the future. The crown prince's gaze briefly landed on me as he said this. That pointed look sent shivers down my spine, and I felt tears welling up. Wasn't it too much to say something like that while looking directly at me? He was basically implying that not only I would be worked to the bone, but that my future children would be, too. You bastard. No wonder he was so quiet during the luncheon meeting. He was busy sharpening this dagger the whole time. The New Year's ball of the sacred year 1378 came to an end. Aside from the gloomy prophecy the crown prince dropped at the end, it had been a rather decent ceremony. I did suffer a bit of emotional damage due to the ring, but I decided to think of it as no big deal. I will visit your territory soon to pay my respects. Haha, come at your convenience. I will be happy to welcome you. Besides, seeing off my in-laws took priority over nursing my minor wounds. The iron-blooded Duke and Marquis Iones had already left, and now Count Flanbel and Baron Artini would soon return to their own territories. These people were hard to gather in one place, and while I wished they could stay longer, they all had their own territories to manage. How could I ask them to stay any longer when they needed to return to their duties? Besides, just as the emperor hosted the nobility at the New Year's ball, it was also tradition for lords to gather their vassals and hold feasts. I wouldn't want to tarnish my father-in-law's reputations by making them seem like nobles who disregarded such customs. I was honestly worried since my only daughter hadn't returned home for so long, but now I can finally relax. Baron Artini, who had become much more comfortable around me since our first meeting, spoke with a warm smile. What he said, however, was more embarrassing. Louise hadn't returned home even once ever since she enrolled at the academy. She stayed at the academy during the school term, and she stayed at my mansion over the vacation. Come to think of it, she was really quite the model daughter. Maybe not a pink capybara, but more like a fire element capybara. I see that we had the same problem. I didn't realize we could bond over something like this. Count Flanbel, who had been standing nearby, also burst out laughing at Baron Artini's words. Unfortunately, Irina was just as much of a model daughter as Louise. I apologize. I should have sent them back sooner. But I had a large part in why Louise and Irina turned into fire elemental daughters, so I bowed my head in apology. However, both of my father-in-laws shook their heads. They write to us regularly, after all. And honestly, there's no safer place than next to the executive manager. I'm thankful you feel that way. Thank goodness. I was really lucky that they saw me as a dependable son-in-law rather than some kidnapper who was holding their precious daughters hostage. I was finally able to send off all my in-laws after a few more rounds of apologies and thanks. The next time we'd all see each other again would likely be at the wedding. Having 4 sets of in-laws makes seeing them off quite the ordeal. It certainly does. Mother, who had been chatting with my mother-in-laws, quietly approached as I finished saying my farewells. The patriarch had already returned to the Imperial Council for business. I noticed that she was still smiling when I turned my gaze toward her. It seemed like she had been smiling the entire time during this New Year's ball. Was she always this cheerful? It felt a bit odd. Mother was usually quiet and reserved, and she wasn't exactly the bright and lively type. But I guess a son's marriage was something of a cheat code for a parent's happiness. Are you returning home too, Mother? With your father away, I should return to keep things in order. Her answer was straightforward, so I nodded. With the patriarch occupied in the Imperial Council, it was up to Mother as the lady of the territory to naturally have to return. Even though the head butler was reliable, it was always better for a member of the family to be present to keep everything running smoothly. But then again, there was still one member of the family in the territory. There's no need to rush since Eric is there, right? That child isn't quite up to the task yet. At the mention of Eric, Mother gently shook her head. Well, no one was good at running things from the start. I didn't know anything at first either, and I had to struggle my way through to get where I was now. But I understood why Mother was drawing that line, so I let it go. It would only cause confusion among the vassals if another son suddenly started meddling in estate affairs when the heir was firmly established. Besides, Eric is busy spending time with Sarah. Wait, what? Maybe it wasn't about avoiding confusion over the succession after all, but something else entirely. I quietly averted my gaze after seeing Mother's smile widen even further. Well, did the reason really matter? The result was still the same in the end. Mother is leaving. Everyone, come and say goodbye. With that, I gestured to my lovers, who had been keeping a respectful distance. I'm sure that Mother would be even happier if she left with them seeing her off. As expected, Mother seemed completely overwhelmed with joy when the 5 of them gathered around to bid her farewell. So, this is what filial piety looked like. It was a first for me. The New Year's ball was already over. In 3 days, the wedding would take place. I couldn't understand why time was moving so fast. It wasn't that I didn't want the wedding day to come, but it felt like time was moving even faster than usual. There were times when a single day felt as long as a month, but now everything was flying by. I've been praying to Enon every day, telling him I couldn't wait to wear my wedding dress. That's a sweet prayer. I'm sure Enon is looking forward to seeing you in your dress as much as I am, Miss Christina. I awkwardly smiled at her bright, beaming expression. Praying didn't exactly make time move faster, but I couldn't help feeling a bit strange. Maybe she really was suited for a life in the clergy. That would explain why her prayers seemed so effective. Amazing. A person whose prayers were heard directly by the divine. Wasn't it a bit of a waste to have someone like that working as a teaching assistant? Are you looking forward to it too, Sir Lafayette? The shy, bashful way she fidgeted as she asked the question made me chuckle. Of course. If possible, I'd love to see you in it today. Well, if the wedding was inevitable, then I might as well enjoy it. Besides, Christina wasn't a bad match at all. I never imagined that our relationship would develop like this when we first met, but the more time we spent together, the more I found her easy to talk to and be around. It was much better than being tied into a political marriage with some troublesome noblewoman. After answering with that thought in mind, Christina's face flushed even redder, her embarrassment growing. It put me at ease. After dealing with the cutthroat socialite noblewomen, her genuine reaction felt like a breath of fresh air. You're about to be married, and you're still using formal titles. While I was sorting through my mixed feelings, the minister, who had lent us the mansion, casually entered the room. "Uncle." "Yes, your uncle is here. How have you been?" Christina cheerfully greeted him, and he smiled warmly, a smile so soft that I feared it might haunt my dreams. This is crazy. I still couldn't get used to it no matter how many times I saw it. It was just shocking that he could even make that kind of expression. The only smile I'd ever known from the minister was his sinister grin, the kind he wore right before he tore someone apart. Of course, I didn't say this out loud. In Christina's heart, the minister was her kind and dependable uncle. Kind? Are all the kind people dead or something? My head was starting to hurt. Chapter 274. My late senior 2. Witnessing your child getting married was something that you never became fully prepared for, no matter how many times it happened, even if said child wasn't your biological one but someone you just held dear in your heart. My niece had navy blue hair, resembling her aunt. She wasn't my biological child, so there was much I didn't know about her and we hadn't spent much time together. Yet, perhaps it was for that very reason that her polite and modest attitude made her even more endearing to me. Unlike my own children, who unfortunately inherited my complete lack of charm, she took after my wife's youthful personality. It would be a lie to say I wasn't fond of her or that didn't want to look after her. "Uncle, look, a dragonfly." "Yes, it's a big one." From a young age, she never feared my rather stern appearance and always welcomed me warmly. I would hoist her up onto my shoulders and we'd tour the land together every time I visited Count Iris's territory. Now, she'd grown into a young lady who blushed at the mere mention of such childhood memories. However, the bond we formed back then remained, making her feel more like a daughter than just a niece. Time truly flies. The little girl who once laughed with her missing front teeth was now a bride-to-be. It truly made me feel that so much time had passed. Though the outcome of that passage of time was a bit unfortunate. My nephew-in-law. I turned my gaze to the man standing quietly with his eyes lowered, the second manager, who had become my niece's fiancé. Christina's choice of partner was truly unexpected. The second manager and I had worked together in the finance ministry, so I was familiar with him professionally, but I never imagined that I'd be connected to him in a personal context. To be frank, I wasn't thrilled about it. In fact, I initially wanted to oppose it. After all, I knew well enough about his colorful and varied romantic history. I feared that my niece would end up as just another fleeting chapter in his life. "Uncle, is it true that Mr. Lafayette works under you?" I was fully prepared to convince Christina to break it off when she first reached out to me through the communication crystal. And after that, I planned to deal with him personally. He went on a work assignment, seduced an innocent woman, and didn't even bother to use an alias. What kind of lunacy was that? They said that crazy bosses tended to have crazy subordinates, and the prosecutor's office was the perfect example of that. But in the end, I failed. Rather than break apart, their bond only grew stronger and their relationship became officially recognized. They say no parent can win against their child. Though I wasn't her biological parent, my parental instincts were my downfall. How could I refuse when a child who had always been so modest and unassuming looked at me with such earnest eyes and pleaded for my approval? My niece, who had chosen the hard path of being a teaching assistant despite her status as a count's daughter and the finance minister's niece, had finally set her heart on someone. If I had forced them apart, she might have been hurt and closed her heart forever. It still drove me crazy. Why did she have to choose the second manager out of all the men in the world? "Here, take this. It's what you asked for." Pushing aside my negative thoughts, I pulled the ring box from my coat pocket. Regretting it now would only make her uncomfortable. Since I'd given my permission, I might as well fully embrace it. Thank you so much." Seeing her eyes light up as she took the ring box dispelled any lingering discomfort I had. Come to think of it, I wasn't exactly the most ideal husband before I married, either. Just as meeting my wife changed me, perhaps this nephew-in-law of mine would change for the better, too. Anyway, Christina, her face flushed with excitement, opened the box and smiled as brightly as she could when she saw the half ring inside. Does she really like that so much? I couldn't understand what kids these days were into. She had never been one to ask for anything, so I went along with it when she specifically requested it. But why was she grinning so cheerfully over a split ring? Regardless of whether I understood it or not, that bizarre ring was going to set a trend. It was already drawing attention because that guy, who everyone had been curious about, wore it. And the crown prince, princess, the mage duchess, and a duke's daughter were all wearing one, too. It was an unstoppable tide. If people didn't ride that wave, they'd be labeled as an outdated noble. I completely forgot to buy proper couple rings. I split one in a hurry, and she seemed to like it. If you don't want to get divorced, then keep that story a secret forever. The saying, ignorance is bliss, couldn't be more true. If I hadn't known the backstory of how that ring came to be, I would have just thought, oh, so that's the style nowadays. Honestly, that kid was already showing signs of early onset dementia. What kind of man forgets to buy a couple's ring for his fiancée? Look, Mr. Lafayette, isn't it pretty? Yes, it's very beautiful, like a treasure you'd keep for a lifetime. As Christina showed the ring to her fiancé while grinning from ear to ear, he hesitated for a moment before answering. I understood him. He must know the secret behind that ring, after all. The very ring he once scoffed at had now made its way back around to his own hand. He must be feeling quite conflicted. And that ring wasn't even made by me. I asked the original creator to split it for me during the New Year's ball. Split it? You're asking me to create that monstrous thing again? He recoiled in disgust when I handed him the ring until I added. The person who's going to wear this ring is the one whose thesis you tore apart. I wish them a long and happy marriage. Saying just that one line, he split it right away. Granted that she went on to successfully submit another one on a different topic after her paper got shredded, but the fact remained that he had caused the first one to go down in flames. If he had any conscience left, there was no way he could refuse. Let me put it on for you myself. Thank you. I quietly closed my eyes while I watched as that ring, which was the result of a guilty conscience, slipped onto Christina and her fiancé's fingers. The process was strange to say the least, but all was well as long as my dear niece was happy. The New Year's ball was the one day civil servants could take a legitimate break. In other words, it was back to work the very next day after the festivities ended. So, we all had to head back to our dreary office jobs after indulging in all the lavish food at the grand banquet hall and taking naps in one of the private rooms. What a terrible fall from grace. What's going on? But I could tell that today was going to be different as soon as I arrived at work. This wasn't a day of dreadful descent, it was going to be one of joyful ascension. Not a plunge into despair, but a climb up a mountain of delight. The first manager cheerfully answered my dazed question while holding up a garishly decorated banner. We're throwing a party to celebrate the second manager's wedding. Congratulations. The second manager is finally escaping bachelorhood. Oh, my mind instinctively flashed back to last year and to the grand display of humiliation I endured when I was sent on assignment to the academy. That torn banner had shredded my pride into pieces. And now, that memory had returned to life a year later, this time to celebrate the downfall of the second manager, who had gone from instigator to victim. Whose idea was this? Mine. Good job. What a good girl. I patted the first manager's head, feeling genuinely thankful. She really did well. It just wasn't right to let a colleague's wedding pass by without a proper celebration. It was practically a duty to create a holiday out of thin air just to celebrate the wedding of the only remaining bachelor in the office. Feeling pleased, I glanced around. The other managers were already settling in. The third manager was laughing boisterously while pouring drinks for the senior manager, while the fifth manager was rummaging through boxes, probably searching for the right bottle of liquor. What a harmonious scene. Seeing all the managers ready to celebrate a colleague's marriage warmed my heart. I had never been so glad that drinking on the job was allowed, at least for today. Oh, executive manager, would you like a drink, too? The third manager, hearing my conversation with the first manager, waved a bottle enthusiastically as he poured drinks for the senior manager. I'll pass. You guys go ahead. Of course, I declined. After all, I wanted to savor this joy and pleasure with a clear mind. I couldn't bear the thought of letting alcohol dull this feeling. This emotion was mine alone. Well, suit yourself. The third manager decided to share his happiness with alcohol and promptly downed the bottle after I refused. Go ahead, drink up. Today was one of those days where no one cared even if people passed out. The second manager isn't here yet, right? I nodded to the fifth manager as he greeted me with a slight bow, and then turned back to the first manager. Enjoying the party was important, but the guest of honor needed to be present for the celebration to truly come alive. Wouldn't celebrating the second manager's wedding party without him feel a bit empty? Of course, these guys had once thrown a surprise party for me without my presence, so I shouldn't be too surprised. He's probably going to be as late as possible. I think he's caught on to us. I laughed at the first manager's comment. The one who dished it out knew best where it hurts, and the second manager had provoked me countless times. He must have realized that payback was coming his way like a boomerang, and today was clearly the day for it. What's he going to do even if he knows? Exactly. Unfortunately for him, nothing would change even if he knew. He'd refuse to come to work. We'd go get him. Him requesting a business trip. I'd just deny it. The wheels were already in motion, and there was no stopping this. My heart raced with excitement. Starting the new year with an event like this, I couldn't have asked for anything better. There was still no sign of the second manager as the end of the workday approached. Do you think he ran away? Should we grab lunch outside while we go hunt him down? I ignored the murmurs of the managers as I stroked my chin. Something was off. This guy wasn't the type to be late, nor was he reckless enough to skip work without permission. If anything, he'd have requested to leave early in some bold fashion. The answer to my question came soon enough. Come get your subordinate. He's in my office. What? The call from the minister came out of nowhere, revealing the whereabouts of the missing second manager. Unbelievable. It was such an absurd statement that my brain froze for a moment. Why was he in the minister's office? That was like finding a sergeant in the general's quarters. I'll be right there. Did that bastard really flee to the minister's office just to avoid the teabagging? Chapter 275. My late senior 3. I walked towards the minister's office to pick up the second manager. Just hearing about it drained my mental energy. Was this guy acting recklessly because he was now related to the minister through marriage? If so, then what a shameless jerk. Was he already using his connections even before the wedding? If he was going to play the connection game, I might just have to pull out my own cards. I'm here. Oh, you've arrived. I knocked and entered quickly, suppressing my complicated thoughts. This wasn't the time for a battle of connections. First, I needed to deal with this out-of-control subordinate. I scanned the room as soon as I stepped into the office and immediately spotted the second manager sprawled out on the sofa like it was his bed. This crazy. What an idiot. In the minister's office of all places. The minister spoke up in a low voice while I was glaring at the second manager, who was better described as an idiot at this point. He had a bit too much to drink. It's surprising that this young guy can't even outdrink me. There was a faint hint of awkwardness in the minister's voice. He's just going to let this slide. My brain finally started catching up to the situation. Now that I thought about it, something felt off. The minister wasn't the type to let his relatives get special treatment. Sure, he cared for his nephew-in-laws, but that affection didn't extend to the man who stole his niece. And yet here was that very person, sleeping peacefully in the minister's office. The minister wasn't one to tolerate that. If he had the time to call me, then he would have thrown the second manager out by now. Why is he here? So, I asked the obvious question. Why had the second manager come to the minister's office instead of the prosecutor's office? And why was he passed out on the couch? We had a drink last night. A drink? A whole crate, actually. Hearing that, I looked at the second manager again, noticing that his face was still flushed and that his body occasionally twitched. Well, that explained it. The guy was completely wasted. It's his last free weekend before the wedding, you know. We didn't drink that much, but he still hasn't recovered. The minister added, lightweight, but it was hard to agree. The second manager usually had a strong tolerance. If he was in such a pitiful state, then how much had they drunk? He did mention a crate, so the second manager probably drank more than his body could handle. If someone stuck a needle in him, booze might come out instead of blood. He didn't come here willingly. I started to feel a little sorry for the second manager who lay there twitching now that I had a grasp of the situation. It wasn't like the guy had fled to the minister's office, he'd been dragged into an alcohol battle with the minister and lost. Unconscious, he had been hauled into the office like a piece of luggage. He hadn't reported for duty of his own free will. If you're here, take him with you. He reeks of alcohol. Well, whose fault do you think that is? I shuddered at the minister's cold words and obediently lifted the passed-out second manager. As unfortunate as it was to deal with this mess first thing in the morning, the celebration had to go on. It was our duty to honor him even if he was unconscious. Nothing could stop our celebration. Ugh, I heard a groaning sound beside me as I carried the second manager back to the office. You're awake? Ugh, yeah, the second manager mumbled incoherently, his voice strange and slurred, but at least he seemed to have regained some awareness. You know, you're the first person to ever sleep in the minister's office. We're on our way back to the office, so hang in there a little longer. Yeah, his response was a bit clearer this time. He seemed relieved to be heading back to familiar territory rather than the intimidating minister's office. Of course, he'd probably be even happier when he heard what came next. We've prepared a little wedding celebration for you. It's time to go for some hangover drinks. Quote. Just as I expected, he was thrilled. In fact, he was so thrilled that he couldn't even bring himself to talk. Ah, the warm camaraderie of the prosecutor's office. It really warmed my heart. 2 days after throwing a wild celebration in honor of the second manager and placing him in the executive manager's chair, the day had finally arrived, the day when the Casanova of the department would meet his grave, or rather, his life partner. It was an emotional day. To our dear sister-in-law, please keep this Casanova on a short leash and live a long, happy life together. You've saved countless young ladies from this man's clutches. I told you, sending a wedding gift was enough. Don't you have anything better to do? And just like that, all my sentiment vanished as soon as the minister made a snide remark to the guest who had actually made the effort to show up. If I don't show my face at my subordinate's wedding, people will talk. Then you'll also see me at your 6 weddings. Damn, I hadn't thought of that. I froze for a moment, realizing the horror. He was right. If I attended 6 weddings, then every guest who knew me could also attend all 6. I briefly imagined a future where not only the minister but also the crown prince attended every single one. Wow, but I quickly cut off that line of thinking. There are some things in life you shouldn't even imagine, and I'd just learned that the hard way. I made sure to be generous. With a slightly heavy heart, I handed over the envelope filled with wedding money to the minister. And I wasn't kidding, it really was generous. After all, I knew both the groom, the second manager, and the bride, Christina. Giving to just one of them felt awkward, so I doubled the usual amount. It's heavy. Thankfully, it was a satisfying sum even by the minister's standards. He nodded lightly as he placed it into the box for wedding gifts. Of course it was satisfying. I'd followed the Gold Duke's wisdom. After all, if you're stressed about money, it just means you didn't give enough. It was a smart approach to social life. Half the battle was just knowing how much to give. But where is your wife, sir? As I looked around, I noticed something off. Why was the minister standing here and greeting the guests all alone? Actually, why was the patriarch of the Iris family not here to greet guests himself? It would have at least made sense if the minister's wife were here, working alongside him as a couple. They haven't seen each other in a while, so I told her to go catch up with family. It doesn't really matter who stands here, does it? His nonchalant response made me feel like my common sense was crumbling. No, it absolutely matters, didn't it? This wasn't just any event, it was a wedding. Still, I couldn't exactly tell him to call her back now, so I just nodded. And to be fair, having the current Minister of Finance greet the guests might leave quite an impression. The guests would feel honored. Well, then, I'll go see the groom. Stop blocking the way and go. With the minister's dismissive wave, I made my way to where the groom was waiting. I could already feel the corners of my mouth twitching. This was going to be a problem. I'm not sure I'd be able to keep a straight face when I see the second manager in his wedding suit. Sitting in the waiting room, I tried to keep smiling. My father's voice rang out with joy, saying how proud he was that his son had finally turned from a good-for-nothing into a proper man. Mother added how relieved she was that I was getting married before I hit 30. Their words echoed around the room, but honestly, they barely registered. It all felt strange and surreal. It wasn't that I didn't want to get married, but just being here, in this moment, felt awkward and bizarre. I couldn't quite find the words to describe it. It felt like I was transforming into someone else and stepping into a different world from the one I'd known. No, maybe that one was too dramatic. Still, I couldn't think of a better way to put it. Why do you look like that? Didn't you sleep well? The executive manager approached from the entrance as I tried to sort out my jumbled thoughts, wearing a smile that he couldn't hide even if he tried. Prosecutor's office's executive manager. Ah, it's been a while. It's nice to see you again for such a happy occasion. Father greeted the executive manager first when he spotted him, shaking his hand with a smile. Watching my father thank him with a smile almost made me chuckle. What exactly did the executive manager do to make my father so grateful? If anyone had played a major role in this, it was the minister, not him. Well, maybe he did help. Then again, my father wasn't entirely wrong when I thought about how I met Christina. If the executive manager hadn't been at the academy, I wouldn't have been assigned there to support him, and I might never have met her. In a way, he was the starting point of it all. After exchanging pleasantries with my father and mother, the executive manager finally turned his attention to me. Congratulations. Honestly, I thought you'd stay single forever. So did I. My mother's face fell at those words, but it was fine now that the wedding was happening. It would have been a cruel joke if I were still single, but today it was just another laugh. The executive manager must have thought the same thing because he gave a soft chuckle and patted me on the shoulder. Now, you've got to continue the Barron family line. Don't worry, I won't bother you during your honeymoon. Take your time and relax. Is it even your place as my boss to be pressuring me about heirs? It felt like the world was upside down. Here was my boss, who was younger than me and still single, applying the kind of pressure my father should have been giving me. If you don't like it, then get promoted. And with that unbeatable response, all I could do was laugh. My parents seemed a bit taken aback by the executive manager's bluntness, but this was just how he was. Despite being from a noble family, he acted more like a commoner. And that's why we get along so well. Having a stiff, authoritarian boss would have been exhausting. The previous executive manager, for example, was an absolute pain to deal with. But the current executive manager was different. Despite being a pure-blooded noble like his predecessor, his attitude toward us couldn't have been more different. Maybe it was because he'd spent so much time with the Six Swords, or maybe it was just his personality. Either way, I was confident he'd appreciate the small gift I had prepared for him. It's only right to celebrate him after he celebrated me. In my inside pocket was a single flower I had carefully saved, one I had taken from Christina's bouquet. The guest who catches the bride's bouquet is the next to be married. Thinking of that tradition, a mix of custom and superstition, made the corners of my mouth lift slightly. I wasn't planning on stealing the bride's gift to the guests, of course. I'd just prepared a little something extra. After the ceremony, I would approach the executive manager and give him this flower, once a part of the bouquet. After all, he was bound to be the next one to get married. I'm sure he'll be delighted. Not every subordinate was as thoughtful as I was, after all. What a cheeky little brat. It's a flower from the bouquet. Since you'll be the next one to get married, I figured you should have one. The second manager approached me after the ceremony, spouting nonsense while offering the flower. For a split second, I remembered the saying, "Don't hit someone with a flower," but I felt like today might be the perfect time to break that rule. Chapter 276. Let's Go Home 1. I could finally enjoy a peaceful break once the major events of the New Year's ball and my subordinate's wedding were over. I was on the verge of losing my mind while managing those troublemakers last summer vacation, but it felt incredibly relaxing now that I had nothing to stress about. Even the Fifth Empire, which was supposed to be this winter's big event, was crushed without me lifting a finger. I wouldn't mind it one bit if life could always be this easy. Here you go. While I was absent-mindedly staring at the clock, just waiting for quitting time, the first manager quietly handed me a piece of paper. I immediately signed as soon as I saw the words, "Leave request," at the top. I already knew the reason behind it, so there was no need to read the rest. This is the first time I'm taking a vacation with my boss. It's my first time spending one with a subordinate, too. It just so happened that where the first manager planned to go on vacation was the same place I was headed, the Tailgilhan County, where the patriarch and mother lived. I'd promised mother I'd visit after the New Year's ball. Naturally, I couldn't go alone, so I dragged along one of her future daughters-in-law. As a result, the first manager also had to take a sudden vacation. Luckily, it didn't seem like she minded. "Oh, I bought a gift for your mother, too. How thoughtful." I gave the first manager a nod as she rummaged through their pocket. The fact that she was being considerate of her future mother-in-law was impressive. Marquis Iones would probably shed tears of joy if he saw this. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he reached enlightenment this year. Do you think she'll like it?" Then, the first manager pulled out a bright red ruby necklace. Yeah, I think she'll love it. Right, I really put effort into choosing it." Seeing the excitement in the first manager's eyes made me feel a bit guilty, but I didn't take back my words. Sometimes, you need to tell a little white lie to get through life. From what I remember, mother wasn't one to wear red clothes or accessories. She preferred soft, warm colors over anything too flashy. But how could I break the harsh truth to a future daughter-in-law who'd thoughtfully prepared a gift? Besides, mother would surely appreciate it simply because it came from her future daughter-in-law. One red necklace should be fine. After all, the first manager wasn't the only one who brought a gift. All of her future daughters-in-law had prepared something, knowing they couldn't visit their in-laws empty-handed. They had bombarded me with questions about my parents' preferences, and they all decided to buy her necklaces when I mentioned that mother always wore one. I didn't know the patriarch's taste, so I kept quiet about him. They must have figured something out for him on their own. So, mother was going to receive a total of 6 necklaces. In that case, one red one wouldn't hurt, right? If anything, it might stand out among the more muted tones. She'll have one for each day of the week. The thought made me chuckle. Thanks to her clueless son, my mother was now at risk of having to wear a different necklace every day. I should have just said she liked all kinds of jewelry and not just necklaces. I also got a gift for your father. And don't worry, I didn't forget you. Wait, why are you telling me this? I was taken aback by the first manager's boldness. Seriously, who'd announce their gift to the recipient beforehand? You would have known anyway, right? It's only natural to get a gift for someone on their birthday. Oddly enough, that was a good point, so I nodded in agreement. It was indeed true. No one needed a reminder to expect a gift on their birthday. Birthday, huh, it felt strange to hear that word. I'd half forgotten about birthdays since my possession. I've had one every year since then, but I always forgot. Besides, it wasn't even my real birthday. Could you come at the end of January, if possible? Yes, that's fine, but is there any particular reason? It's your birthday, isn't it? Oh, however, the karma of forgetting my physical body's birthday came back in full force. Mother's gaze hit me like a lightning bolt as if asking, what kind of life are you living that you forget your own birthday? As soon as I gave my absent-minded reply, that slight tremble in her eyes struck a chord deep within me. If I hadn't said anything at that moment, I would have received a look that was more like pity, like I were some helpless creature. Anyone, no matter how dense, could sense that much. So, I hurriedly blurted out that I'd be bringing along her 6th future daughter-in-law this time, the one who couldn't come before. Only then did my mother's tearful gaze soften. It felt a little like I'd thrown the 4th manager under the bus, but who cared? As long as the result was good, then that was what mattered. But is Penelia allowed to come? I thought the special service agency had strict limits on vacation. It seemed that the first manager was also thinking about the same thing, since she raised a very reasonable question. It was true that the special service agency had a more complicated vacation process compared to other departments. I'd heard they have fewer slots available for vacation at any given time, too. The masked unit gave up their leave. Wow, but if there were vacation limits, then they just needed others to step aside. If the entire masked unit forfeited their vacation, then the 4th manager could easily take hers. It was terrifying that subordinates would give up their leave for their superior, but I suppose it just spoke to how well respected the 4th manager was. After adjusting vacation schedules among the civil servants and ensuring that the Mage Duchess could delegate her duties to the Vice Master. It's been a while since I've been here. It still feels good to return. Thanks to the continent's greatest mage, we were able to travel comfortably. We teleported straight to the front of the mansion, and it'd be honestly stranger if something had gone wrong. Thank you. It made the trip much easier. The Mage Duchess simply smiled and shook her head when I thanked her, as if to say this was nothing. It probably wasn't a big deal for her considering her abilities, but it was still wrong to take anyone's kindness for granted. No matter how small the gesture, showing gratitude was the proper thing to do. Thank you, Beatrix. I whispered my thanks softly, and I could see her ears twitch slightly. Looks like it worked perfectly. My heart was racing. Today was the first time in my life that I would be leaving the mansion. It wasn't just stepping out of my room, but truly leaving the territory. Sarah, are you sure about this? You're not pushing yourself too hard, are you? Maybe we should stay here. That might be. I'm fine. I've already been thoroughly examined, remember? Eric looked more anxious than I was, and seeing him like that made me uneasy. However, this was a step I needed to take. Elle needed to be able to move around outside if I wanted to attend the academy with Eric. I needed to prove and show that attending the academy and going out wouldn't be a problem for me. That way, I could stay by Eric's side. Everyone said I'm fine, remember? Don't worry too much. I placed my finger gently against Eric's lips, trying to reassure him with a smile. The mage who treated me and the priests both said there was nothing wrong. They even confirmed that I could manage life at the academy, so theoretically, everything should be fine. This was just the process of turning theory into practice. All right, I understand. Eric sighed in resignation, finally giving in. But promise me that you'll rest immediately if you feel even the slightest bit off. He even added a condition, but it made me feel happy instead because I knew he was worried about me. Foo-foo, then I'll rely on my knight in shining armor if something happens. Looks like I'll have to stick close to you then. His response made my face heat up. I had meant it as a playful tease, but he replied so casually that it sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. Stay close. That flutter, though, was one of joy. Eric's words instantly sent my mind into a whirlwind of happy thoughts. Eric as he stayed by my side and never left, and Eric as he escorted me like a proper knight. Just imagining it made me feel like I was walking on air. It felt like a dream come true. But this wasn't a dream. This was real. Yes, I'll be counting on you. I smiled and linked my arm with his. I could feel his body stiffen immediately. So cute. His face was even turning red. How could he be so shy from something this small? How innocent. Come on, let's go. We don't want to be late. Why yeah, sure, let's go. Watching Eric stumble over his words made me grin as I confidently stepped out of the room. It wasn't until we passed a mirror that I realized my face was just as red as his. When we arrived at the mansion, Mother and the Countess welcomed us. I was bombarded with questions as soon as we stepped through the doors. Was the journey uncomfortable? How was my health? Was I cold? But knowing that their questions were filled with love and concern, I didn't mind one bit. No, I'm really fine. You don't need to worry. How could I not worry, my dear? The Countess gently stroked my cheek as she spoke with concern, bringing a smile to my face. I couldn't help but smile. She was my mother's childhood friend and Eric's mother, and because of that bond, she even insisted I call her Aunt, in private. I'm really okay, Aunt. You sent such wonderful healers to take care of me, after all. At that, she smiled faintly and glanced over at Mother. She looks just like you did when you were young, but how can her personality be so different? I saw Mother's eyebrow twitch slightly at the unexpected jab, but she held back given that it was my first time leaving the house. Instead, she shot Aunt looks that spoke volumes, as if she was cursing her with her eyes. It must have been a long time since you've seen Carl, Aunt said, ignoring Mother's glare. Yes, it feels like years. It was true, I hadn't seen Carl Opa in what seemed like forever. If it weren't for him bringing his lovers back to the territory or my recovery progressing, I might not have seen him for even longer. He was so busy that he couldn't even visit me while I was ill. 6. I felt a bit overwhelmed when thinking about the number of lovers Opa would bring with him. 6 at the same time, the Count and his wife happily lived with just each other, so why should their son, Carl Opa, be any different? I heard the previous Count had multiple wives. Could it be that Carl Opa inherited this tendency? Did that mean that Eric might end up like him someday? No, I tightened my grip on Eric's hand. No, I couldn't stand the idea of sharing my night with anyone else. Eric was my knight. He was the one who'd protected me since childhood, and I was the only one who had been by his side all these years. Sarah, Eric looked at me, surprised when I suddenly grabbed his hand. It's just a little cold, can we stay like this for a while? I smiled softly at him as I answered. It was a lie, of course. I didn't want to hold his hand for just a moment, I wanted to hold it forever. This hand I'm holding right now, I wish it could be mine and mine alone for the rest of our lives. Chapter 277, Let's Go Home too. A crowd had formed at the main gate of the mansion, likely because they had been informed of our arrival. However, one important person was noticeably absent from the welcoming party. Where is the patriarch? I couldn't find him no matter how much I searched. It was a strange situation, he was nowhere to be seen even though he should have been here to greet his son and daughter-in-laws. How odd. I could have just assumed he had left all the hosting duties to Mother if he hadn't shown up last summer, either. But for him to disappear now. The patriarch had seemed relatively calm even during the New Year's introduction gathering. He didn't seem to have any complaints about my partners, and even if he did, he wasn't the type to show his discontent by pulling a no-show like this. He mentioned he had a meeting with the chairman. He'll be back by the end of the day. Mother must have sensed my confusion because she explained the situation gently. I couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for him once I knew the reason. So he was just busy with work. He must be really busy. What can you do? It's always hectic for them at the start of the year. That comment would make any civil servant on leave feel a bit awkward. But in the Empire, legislative officials were usually far more overwhelmed than those in the administration during the New Year season. So, I just kept my mouth shut. That's my future. I felt a bit uneasy. The title of being an imperial count automatically came with a seat in the legislature, which meant that I'd also become a member of the council once I inherited the title. Of course, someone with a high enough position in the administrative or military sector could send a family member to represent them in the council to prevent excessive workload. But wouldn't sending a proxy mean that I failed to retire by then? That was a terrifying thought. Was I really destined to work until I died? Carl Crossius, the Black Carabao. I bet that the yellow carabao which came with the black cow was the crown prince. I always thought that Brat's blonde hair was suspicious. Come in, dear. Was the journey all right? Shaking off the bitterness, I engaged in the usual small talk. Mother's eyes sparkled as she approached Margetta. Yes, we teleported, so it was a smooth journey. Margetta replied with a smile. Mother then turned her gaze to the Mage Duchess, filled with affection and warmth rather than awkwardness. Thanks to Beatrix, I got to meet my daughters-in-law sooner. I appreciate it. There's no need to thank me. I was just as eager to see you. It was quite bold of a countess to call a duke by her given name, but the conversation itself remained pleasant. After all, it was a mutually agreed situation. During the New Year's meeting, Mother had come to terms with the reality of accepting the Mage Duchess as her daughter-in-law and had proposed a compromise. While it might still be too early for informal speech, she agreed to address her by her first name. Since the Mage Duchess wasn't one to rush things, she readily accepted. That's how relationships grow. You were already halfway there once you started calling someone by their name. After all, it was a natural step toward familiarity, like how calling a senior by their first name in the military eventually turned them into a peer. I approached Eric while Mother was now engrossed in greeting her daughters-in-law. How have you been? Same as usual, not much to complain about. I just nodded at his indifferent response. What could possibly happen to a kid who'd been stuck here in the mansion? Sarah, it's been a while. It's almost been 3 years, right? I gave Eric a pat on the shoulder, then turned my attention to the woman standing next to him. It had been so long that my memory was a bit fuzzy, but the blonde hair and blue eyes told me that it had to be Sarah. Plus, her face looked just like how I remembered her from the last time I saw her, so it had to be her. Thankfully, she'd grown up beautifully without any awkward changes, though that wasn't surprising for the head maid's daughter. Yes, I think it's been that long. I'm sorry, I should have visited or at least made an appearance, but I've been neglectful. It's okay, Eric has been coming over enough for the both of you. Sarah spoke with a soft shake of her head and a gentle smile as she held Eric's hand. It seemed natural at first glance, but there was a slight trembling in her hand upon closer inspection. Oh, her shy demeanor made it obvious to me, Sarah had feelings for Eric. I couldn't be sure whether it was just a crush or something deeper, but what woman would hold hands with a man she had no interest in? It was so obvious that even I, who hadn't seen Sarah in 3 years, could tell. The people around them must have noticed long ago. Yeah, if someone couldn't see it by now, it wasn't that they were clueless, they just had no brain at all. He doesn't. I knew as soon as I saw Eric's face. This idiot had no clue. It was odd, there seemed to be an invisible wall between them. Sarah looked full of nervous excitement, but Eric was holding her hand with a completely blank, indifferent expression. You idiot. Smile, for goodness sake. Sarah's going to cry if she sees that face. He'd always been like this. Frustration and resignation washed over me. Eric had been acting more normal ever since Louise broke his heart, so I'd almost forgotten that he was hopelessly dense and oblivious when it came to his own love life. Of course, it was just my luck that this applied not only to Louise but to anyone else as well. At least there's no competition this time. If there was one small consolation, it was that there were no other competitors this time, unlike with Louise. It was just the two of them. So, his complete lack of awareness and intelligence wasn't going to be a huge problem. The only person who would suffer was Sarah, who seemed to be burning with emotion. I had heard she was just starting to recover her health, but it was worrying that she might collapse again from the stress. I'm glad you two seem to get along well. We've been childhood friends, so this much is to be expected. Sarah's expression shifted between joy and disappointment at Eric's words. His words showed he valued her, but at the same time, they clearly drew the line, labeling their relationship as just friends. I guess Sarah will be bored when school starts again. You'll have to spend more time together before then. Seeing Sarah's complex expression, I decided to chime in. After all, the least I could do was offer some support here since I had unintentionally stolen Eric's first love. There was fortunately no competition, and they had shared memories as childhood friends. There wasn't any rush. All they needed to do was spend more time together, and eventually, even Eric might notice her feelings. Oh, Sarah is entering the academy too. Wait, what? She's enrolling? Yes, I'll be starting as a second year. I nodded absent-mindedly, caught off guard by the revelation. Has she improved that much? This surprised me. Sarah had spent most of her life bedridden, but was she healthy enough now to attend the academy? I had thought she was only well enough for brief outings. I guess we'll see each other often at the academy. Please take care of me, Oppa. Sure, I heard you're the advisor for the baking club. I hope we can meet there as well. Yeah, well, at least her recovery was good news. Looks like I'll be updating the club roster soon. A lakeside near the capital, known only to a select few, served as a quiet retreat where a handful of Imperial Council members gathered to relax. It's not a good day for it. Even the fish must be hibernating. This was a fishing spot often praised by the council members, and today 3 of us had come here for some winter fishing. Truth be told, this wasn't the best time for me to be here, considering that Carl was visiting the mansion with his prospective wives today. However, the issue was that this fishing trip had been planned long in advance. Of course, I could have explained the situation and rescheduled, but one of my companions, Count Vardon, had always been the type to quietly hold on to grudges when plans were delayed. He had mellowed with age, but as his friend, I still bore the brunt of his old habits. So, I told my wife that I'd be a bit late due to work and made my way to the lake. Technically, this is work. As a council member, it was part of my social duties to mingle with the Imperial Council's chairman, Count Vardon. Anyone could see that. So, I trusted that my wife would understand. I didn't want to have to use this. Vardon muttered, staring at his motionless fishing rod before pulling something from his coat. What is that? An artifact containing thunderbolt magic. If I throw this into the lake, put that away. Do you want this to be your last fishing trip? At that, Vardon clicked his tongue in disappointment and returned the artifact to his coat. You've grown crazier since I last saw you. The Imperial Council really isn't a place to stay too long at. The former Count of Horfeld, George, burst out laughing at Vardon's antics. There was a sharp edge to his laughter, a mix of superiority and mockery that wasn't just my imagination. Isn't it embarrassing to be pushed aside while you're still in your prime? Passing your title to your daughter when she's barely 20. That's low, even for you. Vardon, sensing the rising tension, joined me in a fierce verbal assault against George. However, I'm content to live as a shameless man. You two should worry about your own lives. George retorted calmly, shutting us both up. It still amazed me. No one expected him to retire and hand his title to his 19-year-old daughter while he was still in his prime. The entire council had been thrown into chaos over his sudden retirement, but there was nothing anyone could do since it had been the Emperor's decision. Are you jealous? Shut up before I bash your head in with my gavel. Ooh, how scary. Vardon, visibly irritated by George's taunting, pulled the Thunderbolt artifact out again. Honestly, using it on him might be more satisfying than throwing it into the lake. By the way, Wilhelm, are you sure it's okay for you to be here right now? George, sensing things were getting out of hand, quickly changed the subject. It was an obvious attempt, but I went along with it. Dragging an electrocuted friend back home wouldn't be fun. It's a shame I wouldn't be there to greet him when he arrives, but my son isn't the type to hold a grudge over something like that. Unlike some people, seems like someone aged backward, George said, glancing pointedly at Vardon. Vardon, clearly feeling the sting of George's jab, raised his voice defensively. I would have rescheduled had I known his son was visiting. Sure, that's easy to say after the fact. I couldn't help but nod in agreement, which only made Vardon's face turn redder. But he didn't deny it outright, suggesting that he probably believed it himself. Anyway, congratulations. I was worried that your son would never settle down, but who would have guessed he was secretly gathering 6 wives? George said, laughing heartily before composing himself and continuing in a more serious tone. And now it's time for Eric to find someone, too. That's for him to decide. George let out a dissatisfied grunt at my firm reply. He was relentless, but finding a partner was something that happened in its own time. Trying to force it as their parent would only lead to disaster. Especially someone as busy as her. To make matters worse, the person George was trying to set up with my son was his own daughter, who, at 19, was already an imperial countess and a council member herself. She had more than enough on her plate. Sure, She and Eric had known each other since childhood, but using that connection as a basis for marriage seemed rash. Forcing something that was only meant to be a friendship into a marriage would only lead to trouble down the road. Zenobia said she likes Eric, though. Then they'll meet naturally on their own. Don't meddle, you're so stubborn. With that, the conversation about Eric ended naturally. And just as Vardon was on the verge of tossing the Thunderbolt artifact into the lake, we finally called it a day. Chapter 278. Let's go home. 3. Evening crept in after we arrived at the mansion, unpacked, and finally got some rest on the bed. Then, we greeted the returning patriarch. I hope the food is to your liking. Mother said gently at the dinner table where everyone had gathered. It's perfect. I've never had such an enjoyable meal. The fourth manager, who had been tense as if on night watch, replied swiftly. Mother nodded with satisfaction, seemingly pleased with her answer. Honestly, there was no way anyone could complain with the feast in front of us. It felt like the embodiment of the phrase, I didn't know what you liked, so I prepared everything. I hadn't been near the kitchen today, but I had a feeling the head chef was probably on the verge of collapse by now. Could we even eat all of this? If you need more, don't hesitate to ask. We can prepare more. Yes, ma'am, thank you. The fourth manager answered without a moment's hesitation once more. Was it just my imagination? Her behavior reminded me of a junior soldier meekly obeying a senior officer's dining orders. It wouldn't surprise me if she forced herself to eat more just to be polite. Dear, let the children eat at their own pace. It's better for them to enjoy their meal comfortably. Then, the patriarch quietly spoke from his seat at the head of the table. It was a warm, considerate remark, likely meant to ease any pressure on the daughters-in-law. Still, I avoided looking at him, afraid I might burst out laughing if I did. A treasure goblin. I knew I shouldn't, but the phrase had been stuck in my head all evening. The patriarch was usually quite reserved, but he was draped in all kinds of gifts today. He looked so different from his usual self. While Mother had only received matching necklaces, the patriarch had been showered with an assortment of gifts, brooches, handkerchiefs, scarves, bracelets, and more. The gifts had no consistency, yet he wore them all without complaint. I couldn't tell if this was his way of accepting gifts as a noble or if it was the reaction of a father-in-law delighted by the attention from his daughters-in-law. Either way, it was a strange sight. It's still better than Mother. At least it was more normal than Mother, who had eagerly put on all 6 necklaces the moment she received them. The givers had been more shocked than pleased. How could I possibly choose between such precious gifts? I want to wear them all, at least for today. But still, it would have been better if they had convinced her to wear them in shifts. The different gemstones on each necklace made her look like she was wearing a rainbow around her neck. It's not a problem, Father. We're actually grateful that Mother is so thoughtful, Margetta said, smiling warmly. At her words, Mother, who had momentarily faltered, smiled again. Her face brightened even more when her other daughters-in-law also nodded in agreement. It might seem like she was overreacting to small things, but I understood why she was acting this way. The head maid had pulled me aside for a quiet word after we arrived at the mansion. Madame never had a harmonious relationship with her in-laws. The former lady of the house passed away early, and the previous patriarch didn't think highly of her. So, she likely hopes to experience the warm relationships she never had through her daughters-in-law. Since she had never received love from her in-laws, she wished to shower affection on her own daughters-in-law. Now, she wanted to create the loving relationship that she had never enjoyed. Hearing this made me see Mother's actions in a whole new light. She's a person starved for affection. I would have never guessed. I always thought of her as someone quiet and emotionally reserved. Who would have imagined that she was carrying such a longing? Thinking about it, even her lack of attention towards us when we were growing up might have been because she hadn't received proper affection from the Crossius family herself. Also, she'd been making efforts to improve her relationship with me and Eric since last year. Maybe she wasn't cold-hearted, just inexperienced in showing love. At least her marriage is strong. That's a relief. I glanced toward the treasure gob. No, the patriarch. Despite her messy relationship with her in-laws and her lack of emotional connection with her children, it was probably thanks to the patriarch that she managed to hold on. Even if her other relationships weren't great, having a husband she could trust must have given her some stability. Wait, why am I finding this heartwarming? Suddenly, a thought struck me. If my inexperienced mother relied on the patriarch for support, then did that mean they had some sort of connection? Did the stern, mechanical patriarch really have that kind of bond with her? How did these two end up having such a good relationship? That realization was a bit disorienting. Maybe the patriarch was just as inexperienced as Mother, and perhaps that was why they were so compatible. After all, he hadn't done much to harm me aside from that one time he sold me out to the prosecutor's office. His indifference toward his children was also similar to Mother's. Never mind. This was too complicated to think about while eating. But since it wasn't an urgent issue, I should take my time thinking it over. Once the doubt took root, it poured out like a broken dam. I couldn't shake the suspicion that perhaps the patriarch wasn't the strict, serious, mechanical figure I had always thought him to be. Young master, I apologize, but could you approve these documents for me? I don't mind, but isn't the patriarch around? That lingering suspicion was brought back to the surface the next morning thanks to the butler's awkward visit. Well, my lord is having an important conversation with the lady. A conversation? The butler hesitated for a moment, then dropped a bombshell. My lord said he was delayed by work matters yesterday, but I noticed his shoes had traces of dried grass and mud. And, normally, there are similar traces when he returns from fishing. I was at a loss for words. In short, the butler was telling me that the patriarch had made an excuse about work only to sneak off for a fishing trip, and that Mother had found out and was giving him an earful. I was stunned. This was so different from the patriarch I thought I knew. Even the butler didn't seem particularly surprised. He just seemed a bit sheepish, as if this sort of thing had happened before. It seems he did attend to work-related matters, but not alone. He went fishing with Count Vardon and the former Count Horfeld. Maybe the look on my face made me seem like a son shocked to find his father goofing off after bringing home a new daughter-in-law, because the butler hastily continued to explain. It was true that I was shocked, but not for the reason the butler thought. As someone who worked in a high-ranking position, I understood that spending personal time with others could often be part of the job. I myself had been dragged on hunting trips with the Crown Prince before my academy deployment. The shock now simply came from seeing an unexpected side of someone I thought I knew. Having a conversation. I nearly closed my eyes at the thought. They called it a conversation, but it was probably more like Mother giving Father an earful, and he had no idea how to respond. If it were a simple conversation, the butler wouldn't have needed to come to me for approval. He could have slipped in, gotten the signature, and left quietly. The fact that Mother figured it out by looking at his shoes was also hilarious. You'd need some serious experience to catch someone with such a small detail. So, he must be a repeat offender. Impressive. It somehow felt like I had uncovered a hidden family secret. Not that it made me particularly happy. I felt like I was sitting on a bed of thorns. I had never actually sat on one, but I was sure it would feel like this if I did. Why was I even here? I'm sorry, young master. This must have been quite sudden for you. Oh, no, it's fine. As I stared blankly at the dust floating in the air, Margetta, who would soon become my first sister-in-law, spoke up. Honestly, I wasn't okay. It was all too sudden. But how could I say no when not just Margetta but also my other soon-to-be sisters-in-law were surrounding me? I was especially afraid of what might happen if I upset my second sister-in-law. There was no way it would end well. At least Sarah was with Nanny, so it should be fine to leave her for a short while. So, what's this about? I asked directly, hoping to get to the point as quickly as possible. If the conversation dragged on, Sarah might start wandering around the mansion while looking for me. We need your advice, young master. My advice? I blinked in surprise. Advice? From me? Why me? They had the Mage Duchess, the greatest mage on the continent, and yet they wanted advice from an ordinary student like me. Why me? It's something only you, as Karl's family, can answer. Margetta added carefully, as if she had read the confusion and doubt in my eyes. It's Karl's birthday soon, right? Ah, that explained it. At the mention of birthday, I immediately understood. Since Hung's birthday was just around the corner, his fiancés were asking me for advice. It was obvious. They wanted to know what gift he would like. It did seem a bit late for them to be asking given that his birthday was just a few days away, but buying a gift doesn't take that long. I don't know. Pardon, I really don't know his preferences. Hung isn't picky about anything. I decided to answer right away. This wasn't the first time I'd been asked this kind of question. But honestly, I had no idea. Hung had never been the type to show any particular preferences. He accepted whatever he was given, and he used it until it wore out. That was just the kind of easygoing person he was. As predictable as it sounds, I think he'd be happy with anything. The Mage Duchess waved her hand before I could finish my sentence, and boxes upon boxes suddenly started appearing out of thin air, piling up in the room. There was 1 box, then 2, then 10, and soon dozens until there were easily over 100 of them stacked up. It was quite a sight. We've already prepared gifts. But the thing is, we might have prepared too many. Oh, I see. I stared in shock at the boxes that were still stacking up. What on earth was this? Did they just buy everything because they didn't know what he liked? Were they hoping that one of the gifts would land on the mark? Well, it was certainly a strategy. There had to be at least one thing in that pile that matched Hung's tastes. I just want to give him something he'll really love. If I give him too many gifts, it might seem like I didn't put any thought into it. Actually, wasn't it a kind thoughtfulness in itself when the number of gifts exceeded a certain threshold? How could anyone top the effort of preparing over 100 gifts just to get it right? Still, I couldn't bring myself to outright refuse or dismiss the efforts of the 6 pairs of earnest eyes staring at me. 3 of those pairs belonged to people I knew well, 2 belonged to seniors, and the last one was from someone so above me that I couldn't even dream of refusing. Well, maybe, something he doesn't already have. Irina chimed in as I mulled over the situation, glancing at the mountain of boxes. That was a good approach. If we didn't know what he liked, then maybe we could give him something he didn't already have. After all, the best gifts were the ones you wouldn't buy for yourself but would feel thrilled to receive from someone else. What doesn't he have? But I couldn't figure that out, either. I didn't even know what he owned to begin with, so how could I know what he lacked? Wait, a vacation, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind without thinking. Or maybe, not just a vacation. How about retirement? If we were looking for something Hung desperately wanted but didn't have, then some time off or retirement seemed like the best bets. Chapter 279, Let's Go Home 4. When I mentioned the word, vacation, the expressions on the faces of my 6 sisters-in-law subtly changed. Each of them had titles so complex that they made my head spin every time I spoke to them. One of them widened her eyes as if I'd just revealed the most groundbreaking idea, while another wore a clear expression of regret and sadness. The third seemed to be deep in thought, as if she were seriously considering my words. Meanwhile, one of Hung's subordinates bit her lip, shoulders shaking. She was probably trying to hold back laughter. It's not going to happen, is it? Given that even Hung's own subordinate was reacting like this, I could tell. The chances of Hung getting a vacation as a birthday gift were pretty much non-existent. After all, there was always a reason when something didn't exist or wasn't possible. If it were that easy to give, then it wouldn't even be considered a gift worth mentioning. Honestly, just spending time with loved ones on your birthday is a gift in itself. Besides, he's technically here on vacation right now, isn't he? I cautiously added that after thinking for a moment. To be honest, I wasn't sure about the others, but seeing the deeply contemplative look on the Mage Duchess's face made me feel like I had to say something. My instincts were sounding loud alarms. If I didn't step in now, the Mage Duchess would soon be sending an official petition to the Imperial Palace, and that petition would likely be a bizarre request for her fiancé to be granted some time off. I could already imagine Hung burying his face in the ground out of shame if such rumors spread through the social circles. If it were me, I'd bite my tongue. No, I wouldn't just bite my tongue, I'd hold my breath until I passed out. The image of his much older fiancée publicly demanding rest for her significantly younger fiancé, the thought alone was terrifying. The Mage Duchess even called Hung baby, sometimes. If that ever happened, he wouldn't just be a kept man, he'd become a literal baby. Maybe he'd actually like that. For a brief moment, I lost my conviction. Although it would be terrifying for me, maybe Hung would actually welcome it. Wouldn't he be willing to endure humiliation and shame just to get that vacation? Of course, I kept that sad speculation to myself. Even if Hung didn't mind, I wasn't sure I could handle witnessing it. The idea of Hung becoming the Mage Duchess's little baby in exchange for rest, that was the kind of nightmare that would keep me up at night. Well, he's bound to get plenty of rest once they're married anyway. I forced myself to think optimistically. Yeah, there was always the marriage leave and parental leave in the Empire. And with 6 wives, that'd be 6 times the marriage leave and 6 times the parental leave. Maybe even more if they had a lot of kids. Or maybe you could give him the first thing you bought when you thought of him. That could have a lot of meaning. I hurriedly steered the conversation back to the subject of gifts before things took a strange turn. If giving everything was too much and a vacation was impossible, then this seemed like a decent middle ground. The first instinct was usually the best. Overthinking it would just lead to odd results. Since they seemed satisfied with the resolution, I finally managed to escape from the circle of my sisters-in-law. Though I still felt uneasy seeing the Mage Duchess deep in thought until the last moment, I trusted that I had done all I could. If anything happens, Hung can deal with it. I was just a powerless student, there was nothing more I could do. So, that wasn't my problem anymore. Damn it. The moment I saw Sarah anxiously pacing the hallway, my thoughts of Hung vanished. I wanted to finish quickly and wait for her in the room, but it looked like Sarah had come looking for me first. This was embarrassing. I had promised to stick close to her in case anything happened. I had even told her confidently to rely on me when she said I was her only support. And yet, I ended up leaving her alone. It was really shameful. Sarah, oh, Eric. Sarah, who had been nervously looking around, greeted me with a smile when she heard my voice. There you are. I was wondering where you'd gone since you weren't in the room. Sorry, I had someone I needed to meet for a moment. Hee, it's fine. I just finished talking with my mother, too. Though she smiled as she spoke, anyone could see that Sarah's hands were trembling and her breathing was slightly off, faster than normal. She was putting on a brave face, but she was clearly shaken deep down. Of course, it made sense. No matter how much she tried to act fine, for Sarah, this was her first time out in the world, her first real adventure. Everything she saw must have been unfamiliar, and every person she passed was likely a stranger. Given how isolated her life had been, it was only natural that she felt afraid. She must have trusted me and relied on me enough to come all the way to the mansion. However, the person she was counting on had disappeared. The shock Sarah must have felt was likely beyond my imagination. If she was wandering around looking for me instead of just waiting in the room, I could only guess how deep that impact was. Still, leaving a lady waiting, you're a terrible knight. Sarah's playful words brought a wry smile to my face. She must have been quite shaken, yet she was pretending like nothing had happened. That only made me feel more guilty. Then, may I ask for a chance to make it up to you? I gently extended my hand and kissed the back of Sarah's right hand as soon as she placed it in mine. Sarah had always enjoyed playing the role of the lady, with me as the knight. Whether she was upset or feeling down, this act would usually cheer her up. I'll let it slide this time, just for you. Thankfully, it seemed to work again. Her trembling had stopped. Thank you, my lady. Honestly, continuing this little knight and lady act even as adults felt a bit embarrassing. But what could I do? Sarah liked it, so of course I went along with it. Besides, after nearly 10 years of this, it was a little late to start complaining now. I repent for the disrespectful thoughts I had and for daring to think of the patriarch as a treasure goblin and imagining mother wearing a rainbow. Please forgive me if you're watching, Enon. What was I supposed to do when they made a person look like the unique rank monster in the world? A rainbow treasure goblin. I never imagined I'd become the complete package, a combination of both. They did say that children resembled their parents, but I didn't think I'd inherit everything. C.A. Carl, do you like it? It was already my birthday, and from the moment the morning celebration started, an avalanche of gifts, rained down on me. Margetta, who was standing nearby, cautiously asked as I stared blankly at the colorful mountain of presents. I was going to choose just one really good gift, but they all seemed to suit you, so. Her words, spoken as if in defense, made me chuckle softly. From the embarrassed glances around me, it seemed like the other 5 had also gone overboard, not just Margetta. I did say just one, didn't I? Eric mumbled under his breath, his voice tinged with frustration as he surveyed the mountain of gift boxes. Meanwhile, Margetta, who was acting as their spokesperson, hung her head in shame. Amazing. Was this the result after they asked for advice? I can't even imagine what they would have given me if they hadn't asked for any. I guess I should be thankful they didn't give me an entire store. Considering their family's wealth, it was probably a miracle they didn't bombard me with properties. If things had gone worse, I might have been smacked in the face with a deed. In comparison, this pile of gifts seemed almost cute. Thank you, Eric. You really saved my sanity. I love it. Honestly, it's more than I deserve. I stroked Margetta's head gently as I said this. Sure, the sheer quantity of gifts was a bit shocking, but they had clearly chosen them with me in mind. It was always better to be loved than unloved. Who would hate receiving too many gifts? Only someone with a truly twisted personality would. It looks like I'll be spending the whole day just going through all these wonderful presents. It wasn't an exaggeration. I had the feeling that simply unwrapping each gift would take the entire day. To be honest, one day might not even be enough. However, that was a good thing and not a bad one. After all, opening presents was like a gotcha game. The thrill came not from the results, but from the anticipation. And with this many gifts, it was like pulling a dozen gotcha tickets at once. I couldn't be happier. The wrapping paper colors are all different, too. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the wrapping paper was divided into 6 distinct colors. They really put thought into this. With the colors, I could even tell who gave which gift. Thank you. I feel like I've received a lifetime's worth of gifts today. From now on, we'll continue to. Your feelings alone are enough. I decided to accept their gratitude in my heart. If I received gifts like this every year, I'd need a 10-story warehouse to store everything. One grand event like this was enough for a lifetime. My firm refusal made Margetta smile awkwardly as she quietly stepped aside. Surprisingly, there were still more people waiting to give me presents. I imagine one of our gifts might be in that pile too. Mother approached next, smiling deeply as she handed me a box. I wasn't quite sure how to react, given the tricky nature of her words. Whatever the patriarch and my mother prepared, I had a feeling it might overlap with something already in that mountain of gifts. Even if it's the same, I'll be sure to use this one. There's no need for that. I'm sure the younger ones picked something better than us old folks. That felt like a bit of a rash comment. If their gift ended up matching one from the Mage Duchess, I didn't know how I'd survive the awkwardness. After that, there were more gifts from Eric, Sarah, the head butler, the head maid, the valet, and so on. I received countless congratulations and gifts from everyone attending the banquet. Yet, even when all those gifts were combined, they still didn't surpass what Margetta alone had prepared. After the banquet ended, I locked myself in my room and began to go through the gifts one by one. You've got to be kidding me. The words slipped out the moment I saw what Eric had given me. I figured you'd really need this, so I got you the best one I could find. I hope you use it well. Eric had scratched his head sheepishly as he handed me the small box, saying it was something I absolutely needed. I had thought it might be a nice fountain pen or something along those lines. But no, a folding bed. When I opened the box, I found a magical version of a folding bed, the kind that transformed from the size of a baseball to something large enough for a person to lie on with just the press of a button. It was the magical equivalent of a foldable cot, an essential item for every government office, and also something already stored in the corners of my office and the on-call room. My hand trembled as I gripped the bed. Of all things, he had to get me this. Maybe I'll leave it in the club room. To be fair, it was practical and useful, just like Eric said. That was why I already had them stashed in so many places. Yeah, I should just leave this one in the club room. Sleeping in the corner there doesn't sound too bad. Damn it. Chapter 280. A fiery start to the year 1. Just before returning to normal life and heading back to the capital, I glanced at Eric, who had come to see me off. This birthday was the one where I received more gifts than ever, but the only one that really stuck in my mind was the folding bed Eric gave me. It was a rather bittersweet birthday. So, I made up my mind. I'd take charge of Eric's future and make sure that he became a civil servant. Did he have any other dreams? Well, he should forget about them starting today. He would be a civil servant from now on, whether he landed in administration, legislation, or judiciary, or even in the military or the Imperial Guard. One way or another, he'd be serving the Empire. As a member of the Crossius family, it was only natural that he should serve the Imperial family. However, we already had family members in key positions in administration and legislation. It would be awkward if we all monopolized the top spots. The army seems like the best option. Yes, the military would be perfect. I could even ask the invincible Duke to take good care of him. Besides, Eric had always had a bit of a soldier's nature. I've decided, I'd send Eric to the military and gift him a folding bed for his enlistment. No, actually, maybe a one-person tent would be better, the kind that popped up automatically with the press of a button. Wasn't that every soldier's dream? I patted Eric on the shoulder, thinking I might just give him both while he looked at me with a confused expression. Thanks for the gift. I smiled broadly at him as I said it. I really meant it. It was a gift I would never forget, something I'd remember for the rest of my life no matter what happened. Even Mother seemed moved by this brotherly moment. She approached us, leaving the slightly weary patriarch behind. It seems like you really liked Eric's gift. Yes, I received something incredibly useful. As much as I hated to admit it, it really was useful. It was the perfect thing to place in the club room, which was practically my hideout. That was why it was an unforgettable gift. I would remember his kindness every time I saw that folding bed or every time I lay on it. Was this what they meant by biding your time and waiting for the right moment to repay a debt? Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. I could feel several pairs of eyes burning into my back. Because I had only mentioned Eric's gift out of all the gifts I'd received, I was now feeling the subtle jealousy of 6 other people. I should explain myself when we returned to my mansion. That wasn't a heartfelt thank you, it was more like an announcement that I planned to take over my brother's future. Once they realized that, the jealousy would disappear. And sure enough, the first manager burst into laughter on the spot as soon as we got back to the mansion and I explained Eric's gift. Damn it, I didn't mind that she was laughing, but couldn't she at least pretend to hold it in like everyone else? It hurt a little. Since I had only requested time off for my birthday, I had to report back to work today. It felt like coming back to the office on a Monday after a wild weekend, but what could I do? I needed to retire if I ever wanted to escape the endless cycle of work and start living for the weekends. Executive Manager. Oh, did anything happen while I was away? Nothing much except for the minister asking for you. The senior manager delivered this unsettling news as soon as I returned to the prosecutor's office with the first manager. But this time, I took it calmly. It was only natural to be summoned by the minister at this time of year. My birthday was at the end of January. In other words, my birthday arrived after a few weeks of work following the New Year's ball. Once my birthday was over, February was just around the corner. It might sound like I was stating the obvious, but this timing was crucial. Everyone seems to be in a rush. Well, they'll lose their budget if they're late. It's no wonder they're in a hurry. It was a reasonable point, so I nodded in agreement. Moving too slowly would only mean getting beaten by other departments and being left with an empty can. Now, with February just days away, the entire Imperial Civil Service was about to enter its berserk mode. People go crazy when money's on the line. At the end of the year, the Ministry of Finance allocated the budget and distributed it to each department. Once this regular budget was sent out, it rarely changed unless there was a very good reason. While many departments tried to bother the minister for exceptions, that was the general rule. The only real opportunity for these departments to turn things around was during the additional budget allocation period, a time of dreams and opportunities when they could secure extra funds beyond their regular budget. It wasn't as grand as it sounded. Basically, departments would come to the Ministry of Finance with their documents, pleading, "We can't survive with what we have." And the minister either approves or rejects their requests. Actually, it is grand. In fact, it wasn't just grand, it was colossal. After all, a department's entire livelihood for the year depended on this crucial period. Right after the New Year's ball, civil servants rushed back to their departments and checked their regular budget lists, scrambling to gather as much justification as possible for additional funds. They spent all of January burning the midnight oil, drafting reports begging for more money. That process usually wrapped up around the end of January. However, it wasn't like these money-hungry civil servants would quietly wait until February. No, they were already at the Ministry of Finance starting from the end of January, bowing their heads to the minister. And this timing happens to coincide with right after my birthday. I wish I had been born a week later. Yes, my birthday was pretty much just a break to prepare for this period. It was like the universe perfectly arranged it so that I could immediately get back to work after celebrating my birthday. If I'd been born a week later, though, there was a high chance my vacation would have been cancelled altogether. They must really be desperate if they're asking for my help. It was that time of year when departments across the empire flocked to the Ministry of Finance, so extra hands were needed. From the minister's perspective, the executive manager of the prosecutor's office must be a valuable asset. Now that I think about it, it pisses me off. I was meant for the military, but here I was, stuck dealing with the Ministry of Finance's mess. Damn it. As always, half of my life's misery was thanks to the Crown Prince. I'm so fed up. I want to scrap this whole additional budget ordeal and just throw a few gold coins at them to make them go away. However, I had to endure it. Handling budget matters carelessly would only come back to haunt me with consequences that multiplied tenfold, or even 100-fold. I couldn't sacrifice the future just to make things easier now. Minister, we would greatly appreciate your assistance. I'll review it as favorably as I can. With that, I mechanically repeated the same line and sent the civil servant from the prison department on his way. Damn it. I rubbed my temples as soon as the civil servant left. I hadn't expected the prison department to come knocking. They were usually satisfied with their regular budget. We're planning a large-scale execution of death row inmates and a prison renovation. Who could have guessed they'd come with something like that? Executions and prison renovations. How was I, an outsider, supposed to know about that? Executing death row inmates. My head started throbbing. These were the prisoners who, unlike traitors executed immediately after sentencing, had been rotting away in the darkest corners of the prison. To execute them all at once was no trivial matter. Usually, rulers avoided mass executions to prevent their reign from being stained with blood. So, executions were delayed or spread out as much as possible. But now, it seemed like His Majesty was willing to proceed with them and was ready to accept the inevitable criticism. The reason was obvious. It must be part of his abdication plan. All of this was to pave the way for the Crown Prince's ascension. His Majesty probably didn't want the newly crowned emperor to bear the stigma of ordering executions early in his reign. The abdication I'd been dreading was becoming more and more real. Of course, it just had to happen during my time in office. Just my luck. The thought of having to bow my head for days at this age was depressing. Knock, knock. I frowned at the knock on the door. After the prison department, it must be the military next, and probably that brat in person. Minister, it's me. I heard you were looking for me. Ah, come in. I opened my mouth, feeling a mix of relief and annoyance. This bastard was really making things confusing. Still, after being blindsided by the prison department, it was at least a relief that I didn't have to deal with that other person right away. This one was slightly better. You look like you've had a rough time. You've aged 10 years since I last saw you. Then again, maybe they were both the same. I waved my hand at the guy who walked in while spewing nonsense. Just shut up and sit down already. How many have come so far? The department from the Ministry of Welfare, one from the Department of Marine Affairs, Department of Culture, and the Prison Department. Oh, what a reaction, like it was none of his business. Next up is the one from the military depot. The door burst open before I could even finish my sentence. Persistent brat. The nerve of someone opening the door to the Ministry of Finance, who was second only in rank to the Minister of the Imperial Household, without knocking. However, I could guess who it was and let out a sigh. There was this thing called knocking, which was a sophisticated, polite custom, but this half-barbarian still hadn't learned it. It was honestly embarrassing to claim to know this person. I'm here. I'm not late, am I? In fact, I would have preferred it if she hadn't come at all. Without any warning, the door swung open. What the? Did I not even hear a knock? It was so unexpected that I momentarily wondered if the Crown Prince had shown up. Even the Minister of the Imperial Household, who outranked the Minister, wouldn't barge in like this. Who could pull such a bold move? Oh, and then I saw the face and everything made sense. Yeah, it made sense if it was her. I'm here. I'm not late, am I? You made it on time. The woman laughed at the minister's curt reply and waved her hand enthusiastically as she noticed me. Oh, the kid's here too. How've you been? Well, just fine. Without a care, the commander of the Imperial Army's Central Forces sat beside me and casually threw her arm around my shoulder while grinning broadly. It's been a year. You've grown a lot since I last saw you. Must be that growth spurt, huh? He's well past 20, so there's no such thing as a growth spurt anymore. Despite the minister's perfectly valid comment, the commander of the Imperial Army's Central Forces just laughed it off. She gave me a few friendly slaps on the shoulder like I was still some kid. Unfortunately, from her perspective, I probably was. If she was on par with the minister, then as a subordinate, I must look like a rookie to her. Compared to her, I was behind in every way, age, experience, everything. Even the fact that I helped defeat Kagan didn't mean much. She was the one who, alongside the minister, played a key role in the battle where Kagan was mortally wounded. It was all thanks to her efforts that the team leaders in the 4th Division of the Prosecutor's Office even had a chance to attempt Kagan's defeat. Oh, right, I heard you're getting married soon. Congrats. How many kids are you planning to have? I'm taking it slow for now. Really? Well, 3 kids per wife should do. I closed my eyes in quiet resignation, imagining the birth of FC Crossius. The minister's eccentricity was well known, but this woman wasn't far behind. Honestly, anyone capable of wounding Kagan couldn't be considered normal. Still, being surrounded by these maniacs made me feel like I was about to lose my own sanity.